Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this information session from the U.S. Department of Energy on community benefit plans for demonstration and deployment projects. My name is Emily Brooks. I'm an engagement advisor within DOE's Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management and the Office of Resource Sustainability, and I'll be sharing this information on behalf of our office, myself, and my colleague, Natina Dobson. First, some disclaimers. This webinar and related materials are not rules or regulations, and the recommendations it contains may not apply to a particular situation based upon the individual facts and circumstances. Additionally, although this webinar and related materials were prepared by the Fossil Energy and Carbon Management, or FECM office within the Department of Energy, or DOE, this is intended to be generalized guidance and is not specific to any funding opportunity announcement within FECM or any other DOE program office. This webinar and related materials include general information as well about the relationship between community benefit programs, or CBPs, and DOE tribal consultation requirements, as well as DOE policies on effective inclusion of tribes in CBPs. However, different or additional tribal consultation or engagement rules and policies may apply to your situation if other federal agencies, such as the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, are involved in the implementation of your program. If you have specific community benefit plan guidance questions, please refer to the funding opportunity announcement for each specific program. And for additional information, you can visit the About Community Benefits Plan page on DOE's website. In this information session, we're going to be covering some basics about what community benefit plans, or CBPs, are and what they include. And the bulk of our time will be spent on looking at how CBPs are evaluated as part of an application package. What are the best practices that we see in particularly competitive CBPs? We'll also share with you the CBP process and timeline from application through negotiation and award. And then last but not least, we will share with you some resources. CBPs are part of DOE's implementation of multiple executive orders related to environmental justice, DEIA, or diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and workforce development. We'd like to highlight two guiding concepts that you'll see come up over and over again in what we're about to present: environmental justice and equity. Now, what you see here on this slide are the most recent definitions from executive orders released in 2023, but they're building on previous definitions with which you're likely already familiar. First, environmental justice within the federal government refers to the just treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of income, race, color, national origin, tribal affiliation, or disability, in federal agency decision-making and other federal activities that affect human health and the environment. We've bolded just treatment and meaningful involvement because those are the key concepts here. Just treatment means protection from disproportionate and adverse human health and environmental effects and hazards, as well as having equitable access to a healthy, sustainable, and resilient environment. Meaningful involvement you can think of as having a voice at the table and having that voice be heard when decisions are being made. Equity within the federal government refers to consistent and systematic treatment of all individuals in a fair, just, and impartial manner, with a special focus on including individuals who belong to communities that have often been denied such treatment. And this would be folks who are members of, say, Black, Indigenous, and communities of color, women, LGBTQI plus persons with disabilities, and persons who are otherwise adversely affected by persistent poverty or inequality, as well as people who would belong to multiple such communities. The role of CBPs is to ensure that the once-in-a-generation investments passed by Congress result in benefits to people and communities, support quality job growth, and increase accessibility to new opportunities provided by the clean energy transition. Successful implementation of those CBPs means we are maximizing benefits to communities, labor, and tribes, ensuring long-term success, and building durable support for implementation. More specifically, the major objectives of community benefits plans are to decrease project risks and delays due to community or labor opposition, decrease health and safety risks to workers and communities, increase participation of affected stakeholders in decision-making, increase opportunities for two-way communication. We'll talk more about that later. Increase communication and increase accountability to affected workers and communities. Increase benefits and broadly shared prosperity from place-based projects, particularly to disadvantaged communities. Through engaging stakeholders early and assessing how projects and programs will impact the host communities, DOE seeks to ensure long-term success and broaden support for further action and development. Now we'll cover what is included in a CBP. The CBP framework is based on a set of four core policy priorities, which you see on this slide, on the list on the left and reflected in the Venn diagram on the right. Those policy priorities are community and labor engagement, investing in quality jobs, DEIA, and Justice 40. And as you can see in the image, they interlock and they build on one another. Community and labor engagement means meaningful engagement with community, labor, and tribal partners, leading to formal agreements with accountability to affected stakeholders. Investing in quality jobs refers to creating good-paying jobs to attract and retain skilled workers and ensure that those workers have a voice on the job over decisions that affect them. DEIA refers to equitable access to wealth-building opportunities. So these are things like partnerships, good jobs, recruitment and workforce development investments, etc. And Justice 40 refers to the Justice 40 initiative, which is a federal government-wide goal that at least 40% of the benefits of certain federal investments flow directly to disadvantaged communities as determined by CJIS, the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, including tribes, and we'll talk more about that later. Community benefits plans are composed using the CBP template. Each funding opportunity announcement or FOA applicant is encouraged to use this template included in the FOA to aid in the submission of the CBP portion of their application. The template gives instructions on the type of information that an applicant should include so that they can submit a CBP that addresses all four of those priorities in the CBP portion of the funding opportunity announcement. For the remainder of the webinar, we'll focus on requirements and best practices for the demonstration and deployment version of this template. That said, the guidance will be generalized, broadly applicable, and we ask that you please reference the specific FOA that you're applying to for all of the requirements, templates, waivers, guidance, and so on for your specific application. Now we'll get into how CBPs are evaluated and some best practices to share with you. CBPs are a new requirement for all funding opportunity announcements that are funded by BIL and IRA, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. CBPs are reviewed by subject matter experts during the merit review process, and they count for up to 20% of an applicant's final score. If that project is selected, DOE then incorporates the CBP commitments into the award, and the recipient will be required to implement the CBP as negotiated during the negotiation phase. We'll talk more about that later. During the life of the award, DOE also follows up, evaluates the recipient's progress on moving forward on achieving those commitments. So what makes an effective CBP? Ultimately, it's a priority of DOE that CBPs go beyond high-level statements or promises. Overall, applicants should strive to explain in detail how they'll meet actionable goals, outcomes, and conduct implementation. And so, accordingly, across the board, effective CBPs are typically specific, actionable, and connected. So think of this slide as sort of cross-cutting advice that we'll dig into in more detail in subsequent slides. Under specific, effective CBPs use SMART milestones with clear metrics to measure success, and they clearly identify those communities that will be impacted by the project and where they are located. Effective CBPs are actionable. They identify sufficient resources to achieve the tasks that are outlined. They reach beyond a high level or vague vision to demonstrate actionable goals, outcomes, and implementation. And they provide specific details for what stakeholder groups will be engaged, when, how, and to what purpose. Effective CBPs are also connected. They include specific commitments that align with the CBP templates and that respond to the specific FOA topic, including Justice 40 and other DOE priorities. They explain how community engagement will impact project or program decisions. They make commitments that consider possible project impacts on impacted communities and workers, labor and workforce, and tribes. We'll talk more about tribes and tribal consultation in a later slide. They offer substantive analysis on the volume of community benefits or when and how they're expected to flow. And they thoroughly model, monitor, or ameliorate environmental impacts. We'll use the term SMART milestones here. And what we're referring to is milestones that are specific, meaning narrow and concrete, measurable, meaning they identify the data that can be used to assess whether you're achieving your goal, achievable, meaning they include benchmarks, they include time and resources available, relevant, meaning the goals that have been identified are connected, and time-bound, meaning they consider setting interim milestones towards a larger goal to evaluate progress along the way. And of course, we're looking for examples of personnel and budget to ensure successful implementation of these SMART milestones. We want to see that they're adequately resourced. So for example, if you have an engagement activity listed, making sure that your application also includes the staff to do that engagement activity and that they have the specific experience of liaising with communities in the past, that they have the resources to do that, and that this is indicated in their resume or as part of their expertise. We've also mentioned a few times the idea of meaningful engagement, meaningful two-way engagement. This describes an overall approach to engaging and building relationships with communities, including disadvantaged and tribal communities, that is based on collaboration, trust, and accountability. This chart describes some high-level differences in format, goals, definitions, and project design between one-way engagement, where information moves in one direction from project leaders to communities, and two-way engagement, where communities have meaningful participation in information sharing and project development. Now, as with the previous slide on SMART goals and adequate resourcing, doing meaningful two-way engagement well requires significant time, expertise, and resources. So the plan and process part of that CBP is really critical. And we invite you to reference this slide later, to screenshot this slide for ideas of how to build on one-way engagement to make it more two-way, where it is more collaborative, where you have project leaders and communities working together to identify impacts, potential benefits, win-win options, and opportunities to produce data and research together. Applicants are encouraged to engage with tribes through CBPs and other means. But can CBPs fulfill tribal consultation requirements? The answer to that is no. CBPs do not fulfill the requirements for formal tribal consultation. That is a government-to-government process between DOE and the tribal government in recognition of tribal sovereignty. Award recipients are required to supply project information to DOE that may be used to support tribal consultation. Tribes have a right to formal consultation with DOE if all of the following occur. An Indian tribe could be impacted by a project. The impacted Indian tribe is federally recognized, which includes Alaska Native Regional and Village corporations. And the Indian tribe is not a party to the grant application or other relevant activity. And important to note here, a letter of support from the tribe or involvement in a CBP does not determine whether the tribe is a party to an action. If an applicant determines a tribe will be impacted by their project, that applicant must provide information on the project location, potential impacts, and how the applicant will engage with the tribe during and, if necessary, after the end of the agreement. And if you have further questions, you can direct them to the Tribal Energy Steering Committee, which coordinates tribal consultation and engagement across DOE programmatic offices. Any actions taken by DOE to engage and consult with tribes follow Policy and Order 144.1. We have a couple of best practices listed here for effectively including tribes within a CBP, broken up into 4 categories of meaningful engagement, transparency and accessibility, protection of resources, and equity. And as with before, we invite you to revisit this slide, screenshot it for ideas as you build a CBP. Under meaningful engagement, things to think about include doing an analysis to determine which tribes may be impacted and that all appropriate tribes have been engaged. Generic reference to tribes, for example, often does not meet the specific part of SMART goals for CBPs. Can also think about whether community meetings are accessible to tribes, whether there are specific mechanisms for incorporating feedback from tribes, and whether there's a possibility for bilateral agreements such as tribal agreements, MOUs, community benefit agreements, and project labor agreements. Under transparency and accessibility, some best practices, things to think about. Cultural resources monitors and community leaders from those tribes have access to sites and processes. The tribal community has access to environmental monitoring data or support to conduct their own monitoring. Status updates are provided to the community. Under protection of resources, buffers are provided for sensitive plants, sacred sites, and other cultural resources. And under equity, workforce development and education opportunities for tribal members. Perhaps opportunities to include Indigenous knowledge in project design, monitoring plans, and mitigation measures. So again, overall best practices for effective inclusion of tribes in a CBP. Now, we often get the question, what are some common areas for improvement? What are some common areas that we would recommend focusing on to make a CBP more effective, to make it a higher quality CBP? Here's some of the common challenges that we see. CBPs that don't reflect an understanding of local context or history, for example, an understanding of how this technology has been perceived by a local community, how it has impacted local communities, local workforce in the past. CBPs that only include an institutional DEIA plan that hasn't been made specific to the project, hasn't been connected to the project and how it will be implemented there. Similarly, a DEIA plan that focuses on early career stage only, for example, an internship program, and not on a longer term perspective on leadership as well, thinking about retaining that workforce. CBPs that have a narrow focus on certain stakeholder types. For example, looking at one segment of industry or one segment of the workforce only. CBPs that rely on one-way information sharing. Again, you can reference that one-way versus two-way engagement chart. Other common areas where we can improve CBPs, if a CBP has inadequate resources dedicated to implementation. Not enough staff, not enough hours, not enough expertise or not the right expertise are some common challenges there. Commitments to engagement and DEIA can lack specificity or accountability, for example, not referring to specific communities that have the when and where identified, not referring to specific tribes, or the commitment or benefit is just not clearly related to the FOA or the proposed project. So how can we boost all of these elements? How can we address some of these challenges? We'll go into more depth on the following slides with some examples of effective commitments and more best practices. And we're going to go through this policy area by policy area, using those 4 primary policy areas on a CBP. First, community and labor engagement. Some examples of effective commitments here are things like a commitment to negotiate a collective bargaining agreement, a community benefits agreement, or a CBA, which is legally binding, a tribal agreement, or a community workforce agreement or good neighbor agreement. And for the application stage, for the negotiation stage, we're looking for an MOU outlining the conditions for negotiation of these agreements. Second, identification of benefits provided to affected stakeholders and local community. For example, the number of local jobs to be created, the wages paid, as well as timelines and remedies for non-compliance. Third, the establishment of community advisory councils, including labor, tribal, and environmental justice representatives. Continuing on with job quality and workforce continuity, again, more types of things we would love to see in the most highly rated applications. For operations phase jobs, commitments to support worker organizing and collective bargaining, such as a pledge to remain neutral during any union organizing campaigns, or a pledge to permit union recognition through card check as opposed to requiring union elections. Pledges to enter into binding arbitration to settle first contracts, to allow union organizers access to appropriate on-site non-workspaces, for example, lunchrooms, or a pledge to refrain from holding captive audience meetings. Also, commitments to provide high-quality jobs, such as 75th percentile wages or above for industry and relevant production occupations and competitive benefits, paid training plus tuition reimbursement for additional training, and the establishment of health and safety committees with participation in training of hourly production workers. So again, note the level of specificity here is quite high. Again, we're looking for those SMART goals. For construction phase jobs, commitments to negotiate project labor agreements or PLAs for large construction activity associated with the project, and an MOU can spell out the process by which those PLAs would be negotiated. Commitments to utilize registered apprentices, such as a ratio of 15 to 20% of work hours. Commitments to local hires, such as 50% of jobs. Commitments to skilled and trained or credentialed workforce with a National Journey Card credential, and wages above those required by the Davis-Bacon Act, the prevailing wages there. For the DEIA, or Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility policy area, here's some examples of effective commitments that we love to see in the most highly ranked community benefit plans. Identifying minority, women, and diverse business enterprise firms and minority serving institutions as planned contractors or partners. Identifying workforce training organizations serving disadvantaged communities, underrepresented or marginalized populations as partners for recruiting, training, and/or retaining workers. Identifying robust and inclusive workforce development investments, including critical supportive services. Commitments to support apprenticeship readiness and registered apprenticeships. Commitments to partner with or recruit from historically Black colleges and universities, tribal colleges and universities, and other minority-serving institutions for research and development opportunities, and specific milestones, goals, and/or metrics related to those examples, those example commitments. The last policy priority area we'll go through here is Justice 40, and we want to pause for a moment here just to clarify some definitions. Justice 40 is a presidential initiative that seeks to address environmental and social injustice by ensuring that at least 40% of the benefits of climate-related federal funding go to disadvantaged communities. And that 40% is not specific to a project, it's not specific to a funding opportunity announcement. That is a broad goal. What you can see here is how we determine that definition of a disadvantaged community using the climate and economic justice screening tool. You can reference that at the link above. Within CGIST, 27,248 census tracts have been identified as meeting those criteria for disadvantaged according to both socioeconomic indicators and environmental burdens. And that constitutes about 28% of the population, the total US population living within a CGIST identified disadvantaged community. So these are the communities that we're thinking about when we say Justice 40 aims to ensure that 40% of those benefits of climate-related, energy and environmental and job-related federal funding go to those communities. So under that Justice 40 section of a CBP, what are we looking for? As part of the CBP, applicants for DOE funding are required to submit a Justice 40 plan, which should provide an overview of benefits that can be supported by measurable metrics, and specifically describe the benefits to disadvantaged communities that the project can deliver, supported by measurable milestones. So this section must include identifying the applicable disadvantaged communities where the anticipated project benefits are going to flow and how those communities are characterized. CGIST can be used to do this. You can also flesh that out by using additional tools such as the Department of Energy's Disadvantaged Community Reporter. Many tools have state-level tools for helping to identify historically disadvantaged or underserved communities as well. We're also looking for identification of applicable benefits that are quantifiable, measurable, and trackable, including at a minimum, a discussion of the relevance of each of the 8 Department of Energy Justice 40 policy priorities, which you can find on our DOE Justice 40 page. We're looking for a description of how and when anticipated benefits are expected to flow to those communities, as well as a discussion of any anticipated negative and cumulative impacts on those communities. Now let's check in on the overall CBP process and timeline. Here are the 3 major stages of the timeline. This is the typical timeline for Department of Energy competitive funding. First, applicants will submit an application for funding, which includes the CBP. Applications are then scored and the selectees determined. That moves us towards the negotiation phase, where DOE works with the selectees to strengthen their CBP commitments and reviews the CBP budget. Here we're looking at strengthening or clarifying CBP commitments if they're needed. At this stage, a CBP becomes a Community Benefits Outcomes and Objectives, or CBOO, and a Community Benefits Reporting, or CBR, document that are created and incorporated as part of the award, and that's how the CBP commitments are incorporated as part of the final award. That's how they move forward. The last stage, the project management stage, progress towards those community benefits goals and milestones are monitored and enforced through the CBU, and additionally monitored through the Community Benefits Reporting, or CBR, and other reporting. So applicants submit quarterly reporting, reports on go, no-go milestones, continuing applications, and make changes to the CBU and CBR as needed. Now let's go over those three documents, the CBP, the CBU, and the CBR. Once an applicant is selected for an award, the DOE will seek to ensure the selectee has completed the Community Benefits Outcomes and Objectives, or CBU table, in the provided Community Benefits Plan template, which is typically offered at the time of the application release. So starting with the CBP at the top, this is the application document that consists of up to those 4 sections we've discussed: community and stakeholder engagement, investing in quality jobs, DEIA, and Justice 40, and contains those commitments, milestones, dates, names, and metrics. So this supports applicants in documenting commitments, and that standard template that applicants use supports the merit review evaluation process. During the negotiation stage, that is split into 2 documents, the CBU and the CBR. High-level summary of what those are here. The CBU on the left in blue is a high-level summary of the 4 sections that were addressed in the CBP. And this contains just the high-level commitments, the general timeframes, the SMART milestones. This is for establishing accountability. This is how we look at progress of CBP goals and milestones as part of the agreement. This is how we help establish clear accountability for progress. The Community Benefits Report, or CBR, in the green on the right is an Excel reporting template that contains specific dates, names, and metrics. This is a form where the selectee and Department of Energy can track specific dates, names, locations, and other metrics associated with the goals and milestones that are provided in the CBU. And this is a machine-readable format that can feed into a dashboard and track progress of planned and actual commitments and milestones and associated metrics. So again, what you want to take away from this slide is this is how the commitments that are written down within the CBP that are negotiated during the negotiation process become part of the project, become part of the award, and this is how we monitor and evaluate success at implementation. More specifically, that CBU is a publicly releasable executive summary of the negotiated community and labor commitments that explains how those commitments, milestones, and metrics align with and contribute to the project objectives. It also contains high-level commitments, general timeframes, and SMART milestones from the CBP. The CBU is included in the award package. It should not include specific details of the commitments, for example, names and dates, to allow some flexibility during the project management phase without triggering an award modification. And the overall purpose of the CBU as an award attachment is to establish clear accountability and enforceability for the progress towards CBP goals and milestones as part of the agreement with the selectee or awardee. The CBR, or Community Benefits Reporting Template, is a standardized template that's intended to assist in tracking the progress of benefits and commitments during program management and reporting. So this is used to track progress towards planned and actual commitments and associated metrics, and facilitates data collection by DOE. Last but not least, as we bring this information section to a close, we'd like to share with you some overall resources, references, and contact information as you prepare a CBP as part of your application. And again, we do highly recommend that you go back and re-reference, screenshot earlier slides in this presentation, and reference the slides as well for more detail on those best practices that we hope to see in the most effective CBPs. First questions, where can you find FECM, fossil energy and carbon management funding opportunities? 2 places, the FECM solicitations and business opportunities page, as well as the NETL solicitations and business opportunities page. If you have questions on specific funding opportunities to which you're considering applying, create an account on FedConnect, fedconnect.net, to view the question and answer session for that specific FOA. And you can also submit additional questions for that FOA that will be answered and updated on FedConnect for everyone to read by project team members. And those updates happen regularly. So FedConnect will always be your go-to, your one-stop shop for specific FOAs. If you have additional broader questions for FECM projects and programs, you can reach out to the FECM engagement staff, including myself, Emily, and my colleague Natina at the email addresses listed here. For tribal engagement, again, you can reach out to the Tribal Energy Steering Committee. And for community benefit plans at DOE in general, we have a DOE CBP email. And additional helpful resources related to CBP development and implementation that we've collected for you. Again, we recommend screenshotting, pausing on this slide to review the links. On the left, we have some DOE resources about CBPs, Justice 40, workforce and community engagement, community benefits agreements, and an example of a CBP forum and game developed by the Office of Energy Equity or Energy Justice and Equity here at DOE. FECM specific resources, you can see our Planning for Societal Considerations and Impacts document, and some external resources from EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and a workshop on leveraging community benefit frameworks from the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine for additional ideas. And that concludes our information session on community benefit plans. Thank you for joining.